Hey folks, welcome back to the channel and Happy New Year. So this is a project I mentioned before New Year's, and I got a little bit of a head start on it in an earlier episode, but this is a Squier Bullet Strat 2002 20th anniversary model. I'm going to do a couple of upgrades to this Strat, and I hope to do at least one other Squier Affinity Strat upgrade in the future. This kind of gives you an idea of what can be done with a model like this. I'm going to go with some of the upgrades for the features that I dislike the most on this Strat. Starting up here at the headstock, I really dislike these tuners. They're a very standard set of tuners and they just have a stamped steel cover. Otherwise they're basically open gear tuners. The plastic nut, not a big fan of that. And this bridge with these cast saddles, I really don't like these saddles. So we're gonna do a couple of upgrades, probably do a pickup, probably do some pots, maybe a switch, pickguard, probably a jack, and just sort of see where this thing goes. But let's go ahead and start by removing this pickguard and seeing what's underneath here. All right, well, if you're paying attention, you can already tell there's a difference between this pickguard and a more standard Strat pickguard, which is that this is only a 10 screw pickguard, and standard Strat pickguards are either 8 or 11. So this one's a little bit of an oddball right from the start. And I also don't know if this cutout around this hardtail is any different than a tremolo, but we'll figure that stuff out later. Well, it's very tight here around this jack. Let me go ahead and remove this jack plate. That might give us a little bit more slack in the jack whenever I take this off. That's odd. The bridge ground must go here to the jack, which I guess is okay, but it's definitely a chintzy little jack, kind of a really thin arm here for the tip to connect to. Let's go ahead and untangle this a little bit. All right, that should give us a little bit more room to get this pickguard off. There we go. So here's the humbucker. Sort of a brass coated steel base plate and a mini pot that looks like an Alpha 500K. So really nothing to it inside here, and we're going to change that. So this pickup is a Gibson 490T bridge pickup, and it's going to be the basis for my build here. This 490T is not very hot of a humbucker, and it kind of has sort of a bad rap because it comes in some of the cheaper lines of Gibsons, but I think it'll fit perfectly in this Squier. I don't know if you really feel strongly about having a Gibson pickup in a fender, but I feel like this is the perfect style of upgrade, and it's going to look really great because it's got this chrome cover. Other than the chrome cover, it's got a splittable 4-wire connection inside, so we'll be able to do coil splitting and other unique stuff with that. To go along with that, I've got a couple of Vintage Forge top hat knobs. I'm going to use a 2-knob configuration, so I've got a couple of new 500K pots here. I've got a couple of switches. We might use those for coil splitting, coil tapping. I haven't fully decided on my wiring diagram yet. Then I've got a pure tone jack. That's a multi-contact jack. I'll show you more on that later. Got an upgraded capacitor, got a treble bleed circuit, and I've got a couple of strap buttons that we're going to use. So I've got the basis for an upgrade here, and let me show you one other part that I have, and we'll go ahead and get started on some of these upgrades. So I picked up this Fender saddle set on Amazon, and I'll put the link to that in my description. I'll put the links to the other parts that I have in this episode also in the description. But anyway, these are stamped steel saddles that actually are Fender branded, and I like those quite a bit more than I like the cast saddles that are on the original hardtail bridge. Let's go ahead and take this jack apart here. I'm going to go ahead and install the brand new jack, but I won't wire it in just yet. So getting this out is going to require us to either cut or desolder these wires. I'm going to be nice to the guitar, and I'm going to go ahead and desolder them. So I'll cover everything up in terms of paint with a towel. I got a screwdriver here to hold the jack in place while I desolder these wires. That's all there is to that. Now we're going to install this jack into the plate here, and let me show you a quick side-by-side comparison of the pure tone jack and the stock jack. I'll show you a couple of still pictures here, and the pure tone jack will be on the left hand side and the original jack will be on the right. You'll notice a couple of things about them. Basically, that the electrical connections on the pure tone jack are numerous and much bigger. And also the nuts and other hardware are quite a bit thicker and bigger on the pure tone jack. Luckily though, this pure tone jack will install into the original jack plate. Now that doesn't actually always happen without having to drill this plate out a little bit, but luckily this one fits okay. I'm going to use a washer on the front and back. The back side is a toothed washer, to keep the jack from slipping. I've also got 2 nuts on here, front and back. All right, that's all there is to that, and I'll tighten it down with a wrench a little bit later. Now with the jack out of the way, and since this bridge ground is going into the jack cavity here and not connected to one of the pots, this pickguard should just come right off now. All right, so you can see that this guitar is only routed for a single humbucker, so it's not an option to upgrade these to multiple pickup configurations unless I wanted to do some routing here. One other thing that I'll note about this body, since we're in here, is that I don't see any shielding paint on the body itself, so we'll probably address that. And I also note that this body is a plywood body, and I'm only saying that just in case you're wondering about this particular Squier Bullet, what it's made of. It's got a maple neck, rosewood fretboard. I believe it's got a skunk stripe neck. Yes, it does. Other than that, the body is fairly thin, fairly lightweight, although it is plywood. I think the weight savings comes from its thinness. Okay, to get started with the saddle upgrade, I'm going to be taking these saddle screws out and removing the saddles. But one thing that I'll point out if you're doing an upgrade on your own guitar is that you might want to measure the distance from each one of these saddles to the nut at the top of the neck, and that'll give you an idea of where to set these back when you're done. Now another pro tip, as you're removing these, you want to keep track of them in order. And the reason for doing that is so if you want to reverse the process and reinstall them, everything's going to be at the correct height already. You'll also want to keep track of the springs and screws because those are different lengths. Now once you get those saddles removed, this is the perfect time for you to clean or polish your bridge. And if you have a chrome one like mine, you're going to want to use some kind of a polish on it. What I tend to use is semi-chrome polish because it works on a variety of different metals. All right, now we can move on to installing these saddles. And with these Fender saddles, there's something that you'll notice that 2 of the saddles are slightly different and 2 of the springs are slightly different, and they don't all go in the same place. So basically, all the springs are identical except for the length, and the 2 shortest springs usually go on your lowest 2 strings. That's usually because the intonation on those is further back than the rest of the saddles. In terms of the saddles, they're identical except for the screws. The 2 shortest screws go on the outsides, so on the E strings. Here's a shot of the saddles fully installed. I mentioned earlier that the saddles with the 2 shortest screws should go on the outsides, on the E's, and the screws that I'm actually talking about are not the intonation screws. Those are all the same length. The screws that I'm talking about are the height adjustment screws. So just pay attention to the lengths of those height adjustment screws as you're putting these saddles in. I've also started to mark the center point of the bridge, or at least where the saddles lay when the strings are installed. So I threw 1 string on here, drew a line there, and I also double checked that these marks here extend all the way to my neck up here and hit the sides of the neck. So everything's in line from my neck all the way down, or from the nut all the way down to the bridge. And I just wanted to do that because I actually have the pickguard, and let me show you that. So this is a DoPro pickguard, and it's just a Chinese vendor, I think, that sells through Amazon. I chose this pickguard because it just gives a faint outline of what the Strat pickguard shape should be. It's a black, white, black pickguard, 3-layer pickguard, so it just has that nice little white line around, and it still maintains the black on black aspect of the guitar. And I went ahead and drew a center line on the pickguard, and it does turn out that I'm going to need to enlarge the sides of this route here for the bridge, because the bridge is just a touch wider. So I'll work on those edges with a file and get them worked out. But the reason that I drew all these center lines, I wanted to make sure that I'm taking the right amount off of each edge. And it looks like I'm going to have to take a little bit more off this side than I am this side, but that's okay. Before I go and modify the pickguard, I want to go ahead and address the lack of electrical shielding in these cavities. And if you haven't seen my episode on creating your own shielding paint with craft paint and graphite powder, go ahead and take a look at that. That's what I'm going to be using on this guitar, so it's just going to require about 2 coats here in this cavity. Now before you get started with this, make sure that you've cleaned out all of the old polishing compound and other grime and dirt that's inside this cavity, or else this paint won't stick very well.
Okay, well, I'll finish up with a second coat after that dries. We're creeping up on the 10-minute mark, so I'm going to go ahead and call it an episode for today. When we come back, I'll work more on the electronics, getting that pickguard situated, and we'll probably address the tuners and the string trees and whatever other parts that I've got on deck. I appreciate y'all tolerating the delay between the last episode and this one, because I really was dealing with a really bad flu and my entire family got hit with it, unfortunately. It just 'tis the season for that stuff. I appreciate all the likes, all the comments. I love the subscriptions. Please visit my Amazon links, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks a lot.